Hello everyone, wishing you all good health and peace in life. Behind every powerful man, there's often a silent guardian. And for James and Tu Diep, it was her, the secretary. The woman who stood in the background, never asking for recognition. Yet always watching, always protecting, she carried a secret. A quiet devotion, a heart that never rested. But when Tu Diep returned, not broken, but stronger, and carried James through his darkest hours, the secretary's heart wavered. Not from jealousy, but from the ache of knowing. She was never the one he waited for, and still, she chose to protect them both. Because sometimes, love doesn't ask to be seen, it simply stays in silence. The office lights had long dimmed, but Trang remained at her desk, fingers hovering above her keyboard, eyes glazed in quiet thought. She wasn't just James's secretary, she had been his shield, his silent confidant, the one who saw the storms before they arrived and softened their blow before anyone noticed. No one knew how many times she stayed late to rewrite contracts James was too exhausted to fix, or how many anonymous tips she intercepted, meant to destroy him. No one knew the meetings she canceled behind the scenes when the company was on the edge of collapse. She didn't ask for credit, she didn't want it. Her place was in the shadows. That's where she belonged, or so she believed. But things began to change when Tu Diep walked in. She was simple, sweet, honest, a girl who smelled of earth and rice fields, not polished marble floors. At first, Trang thought Tu Diep would crumble in James's world of cutthroat deals and masked betrayals. But day by day, she watched Tu Diep surprise everyone, including James, including herself. Trang's heart tightened each time she saw the way James looked at Tu Diep with softness, with hope, with something she had never seen in him before. Trang had been with James longer than anyone, but never once had he looked at her like that. Still, she protected them. Even when John, the man behind the company's sabotage, planted traps, it was Trang who uncovered them quietly. Even when James was arrested, it was Trang who rushed to gather evidence, who convinced the lawyer to stay, who kept the board from collapsing into chaos. And when James lay in the hospital, half-conscious and bruised from the blows of betrayal, it was Trang who stood in the hallway, fighting the urge to break. Then Tu Diep returned. She stepped in through the cold corridor, holding a bowl of porridge and a heart full of love. Trang watched from the shadows as Tu Diep gently lifted James's weak body and cradled him like something fragile and irreplaceable. Then Tu Diep returned. She stepped in through the cold corridor, holding a bowl of porridge and a heart full of love. Trang watched from the shadows as Tu Diep gently lifted James's weak body and cradled him like something fragile and irreplaceable. Later that night, as Trang stood on the rooftop of the company building, the wind tugging at her coat, she whispered to the sky, "I protected you both not because I wanted anything, but because I believed in your love, even when neither of you did." Epilogue: no one ever knew the full extent of what Trang did. No one ever will. But in every quiet choice, every silent sacrifice, and every unspoken goodbye there lived the strength of a woman who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. She was never the love story. She was the reason the love story survived. The secretary's farewell, Trang's quiet departure. The day James returned to the office, it was as if life had been breathed back into the company. Employees clapped, flowers lined the halls. Tu Diep stood beside him, her eyes glowing with quiet pride, her hand resting gently in his. Trang stood a little behind, as she always had, watching, organizing, making sure everything ran smoothly. No one noticed the envelope tucked inside her coat pocket. No one saw the way her eyes lingered on James, just a heartbeat longer than necessary. That night, after the lights went out and the office emptied, Trang returned to her desk. She placed a letter on James's table, neatly folded, no signature. Then she walked out for the last time. The letter, James, This will likely be the first time you read my words without me standing by, ready to explain or protect you from what comes next. By the time you see this, I'll be gone, not because I am angry or heartbroken, but because my part of the story has ended. I was never meant to be the center of your world. I only wanted to keep it from falling apart until someone arrived who could truly hold your heart. And she did. Tu Diep did. She gave you what I never could: peace, hope, simplicity. Things I tried to give through long nights and cold coffee, but failed. I have no regrets. Please don't look for me. I'll be fine. Just promise me you'll take care of her and yourself with silent loyalty. Trang. Trang's new beginning. Far from the city, Trang found herself in a quiet coastal town where no one knew her name or her history. She started working in a small bookshop where the days were slow and the ocean air gentle. She learned to rest. She read stories she never had time for before. She smiled at strangers. She began writing memoirs, perhaps, or maybe just letters she'd never send. And sometimes when the waves were quiet and the stars clear, she would think of James and Tu Diep, not with pain, but with a soft kind of warmth. She had loved, she had protected, and she had let go. Final thought: not all heroes wear armor. Some wear quiet smiles, carry heavy hearts, and leave with grace before anyone knows they were bleeding. Trang was never seen, but she was always there. Trang's new chapter, where the waves whisper healing. Life in the small coastal town was nothing like the world Trang had left behind. There were no board meetings, no deadlines, no hurried footsteps echoing down glass hallways. Instead, there were warm sunrises, the smell of salt in the air, and the soft hum of the sea, constant, calming, like a lullaby for a weary soul. Trang spent her mornings arranging books in the quiet shop nestled between two cafes. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Han, treated her like family, never asking questions about her past, only offering warm tea and kind smiles. It was the first time in years that Trang truly breathed free. She began writing again, stories of people who loved in silence, who fought without recognition, who let go so others could fly. It was therapeutic. Each page was a release, a step forward. A chance encounter. One rainy afternoon, a man entered the bookshop, dripping with sea water and laughter. His name was Anna, a marine researcher who had recently moved to town to study the coral reefs. He had bright, curious eyes and the kind of gentle humor that didn't demand attention but offered comfort. Trang handed him a book on marine biology and tried not to meet his gaze for too long. But he came back the next day, and the next. He asked about books, then about the sea. Eventually, he asked about her. "I used to work in a place where people forgot how to be human," she said one evening as they walked along the shore. And didn't pry. He simply nodded, then said, "Well, I'm glad you remembered." And just like that, a new kind of connection began, not born of pain or obligation, but of genuine presence. Back in the city, meanwhile, James and Tu Diep had moved forward too. Their love, once tested by loss and betrayal, had matured into something enduring. They never heard from Trang again, not directly. But one day, James received a book in the mail. It had no return address, only his name and a title. The Woman in the Background. Inside was a handwritten note: "To the ones I believed in. May you never forget those who fought for your happiness, even in silence." With peace, James closed the book slowly. Tu Diep sat beside him and took his hand. "She was always stronger than we thought," Tu Diep whispered. "Yes," James nodded, "and braver." Final reflection: Trang's quiet triumph. Trang never needed applause. She didn't crave recognition. She chose the quiet path, the one where few noticed her sacrifices, but where her actions saved lives, protected hearts, and helped love blossom. She didn't end up with the man she loved, but she found something deeper: peace, purpose, and the freedom to begin again. Because sometimes the strongest women are not the ones who win the spotlight, but the ones who walk away with grace and build a new world of their own. The letter she never sent. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and bathed the sea in a warm golden hue, Trang sat by her window with an old notebook in hand. Inside it, tucked between half-written poems and journal entries, was a folded letter, aged, creased, but never delivered. It was a letter she had written to James years ago. James, I've loved you in silence for far too long. I know you chose her, and I see now she was your peace. You were always kind, always respectful, but I was always just your shadow. I don't blame you. You never made promises. I stayed because I wanted to. I protected you because I believed in the man behind the title. If you're reading this, it means I finally let it go. I wish you and Tu Diep nothing but happiness, Trang. She stared at the words, the ink slightly smudged from an old tear. Then, with a quiet breath, she took a match from the drawer. Holding the letter to the flame, she watched it burn slowly in the glass dish. No more looking back. No more waiting. A twist of fate. Weeks later, the small coastal town welcomed a surprise guest, Tu Diep. She had come alone, seeking quiet before the birth of her first child. News of Trang's whereabouts had reached her through a friend of Mrs. Han, though she hadn't been sure if Trang would want to see her. When they finally met at the bookshop, there was a moment of silence, thick with emotion, heavy with all the things unsaid. Then Tu Diep spoke softly, "Thank you for everything. I know you were there, even when we didn't see it." Trang blinked back tears but smiled. "You were brave. You gave him something I never could, your whole heart." Tu Diep reached out and held her hand. "You gave him something else, your strength, your protection. Without you, we wouldn't have made it." The unexpected visitor. That evening, as they sat under the stars, a voice called out from the boardwalk. "Trang," it was Anne, holding 2 bowls of steaming crab soup. "I brought dinner. Hope your famous guest doesn't mind sharing." Tu Diep laughed, only if she shares stories in return. And for the first time in a long while, Trang laughed too openly, freely. She wasn't the silent protector anymore. She was just Trang, a woman who had learned to let go, to heal, and to open her heart again. The quiet heroine. They say not all warriors wear armor. Some wear cardigans, carry schedules, and stand behind the people they love. Trang was one of them. She never needed to be the center of anyone's story, because she had finally become the heroine of her own. Life lesson, silent strength, and the courage to let go. Not all love stories are about being chosen. Some are about choosing to love quietly, protect from the shadows, and walk away with dignity. Trang's journey teaches us that true strength doesn't always come from grand gestures or recognition. Sometimes it lies in silent sacrifice, in staying loyal even when the heart aches, and in letting go when love is not returned. She reminds us that self-worth is not measured by how much we are loved by others, but by how deeply we remain true to ourselves. By choosing peace over bitterness and kindness over resentment, Trang became more than just a secretary. She became a quiet heroine. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means understanding that some things are not meant for us and having the courage to move forward anyway. In the end, love may not always arrive in the form we imagined, but it will come if we stay open, honest, and brave enough to begin again.